Begin the current Daf, Mesechta Yevamos Daf Ayin Aleph. We begin 10 lines down at the top of the Yomim. The Gemara continues explaining the halacha of a brisa. Two different opinions we quoted in the previous Daf, explaining the opening halacha of this parak regarding ha'orel, which we spoke about the orel that cannot eat truma. Now our Daf continues explaining the opinions mentioned and respectively in contrast to the other one's opinion. Which corresponds to the concept of Necheskel turning to the Daf. Today's Daf. Something we discussed in today's Daf are Rabbi Kiva's opinion regarding the source that an oral is disqualified from truma, which we have a machlekes tanoim regarding where the source is. The halacha of malva talva, what's the halacha of someone who's circumcised but did not tribal yet regarding his gerus. Arei l'shalei bezmana, regarding a child that's an oral before 8 days old, do we consider him then as an oral with its flaws or not? 5 instances of oral b'shas achila, b'shalei b'shas asiyah, and that is with the Psukim bring down that one's children and slaves have to be circumcised to be able to have the Karban Pesach. However, one of them mentions it at the time of the eating, that they cannot be oral, and one of them mentions regarding Asiyah, and the Gemara describes how it could be possible that one of them could be an oral at the time of the eating, but not at the time of the making the Karban Pesach at the Shechita. Oral Mekabel Hazah, the halacha that someone who's uncircumcised could still be sprayed to be purified from his tumah, and the origin of mitzvahs priya v'milah. We know that regarding the milah, there's 2 parts. There's the circumcision, which is removing of the foreskin, and then there's also mitzvah priya, which is there's this membrane that has to be pulled back. What's the source, the origin of that halacha? So we said in the previous stuff a brisa, which was they explained the opening halacha of our Mishnah. We said the opening halacha of this parak was ha'orel cannot eat truma. So on that the Gemara brought a brisa, a machlekes tanoim. What's the source of this halacha that an oral cannot eat truma? It doesn't say anywhere in the Torah that an oral cannot eat truma. So Rabbi Eliezer says it's a gzera shalom. By the Karban Pesach it says Teisha b'sachar lo yechol bay, and by truma it says also Teisha b'koyim b'sachar lo yechol kodesh. Now Teisha b'sachar is not referring to oral, but just like by Karban Pesach it says Teisha b'sachar, oral explicitly the Torah tells you an oral cannot eat the Karban Pesach. So too an oral is forbidden by truma. That was Rabbi Eliezer. Kiva says, no, wait, it's not to come on to Gzera Shava. It says, ish, the rabbis are oral, meaning, the pasuk says, ish, mizera, aron, vutzuru, azab, so just like a tummy person, an oral is included from the extra word ish, to tell you that he's also going to be disqualified from Mekadshim, which actually refers to Truma. That says Rabbi Kiva is the source for this halacha, that an oral cannot eat Truma. That's our Gemara continues. From 10 lines down from the top of the Yom Daf Ayin Aleph and Aleph. The Gemara quotes that what we just said, Omamar. We quoted the Bryce in the previous Daf. He says, no, ain't it tzarech. You don't have to be made or oral from Truma, from Gzera Shava, or from Pesach, from Teisha B'sachar. As we just quoted right now, it says in the pasuk in Vayikra ish. Any man, as we said, from the children of Aaron that has tzaras or zav, meaning he has tummy. He's not allowed to eat from the Kaddish, meaning from Truma, until he purifies himself. What's the extra ish? L'Rabbah says to include someone who's uncircumcised to say that he's also going to be possible from eating Truma. Says the Gemara, where do you see from the word ish, anything about oral? I understand you're including someone who is flawed that cannot eat Truma. But I can tell you, L'Rabbah says maybe someone who's an oinen, we know, for example, he can't have kaddishim, certain things an oinen cannot have. So maybe it's including an oinen to be possible from truma. Says Gemara, no, I'm a Risa Rechanin, you can't say that. Why not? Because Amakra, the pasuk says in Vayikra v'chol zar, the pasuk says that any zar lo yochel kodesh cannot eat truma, which teaches zar samarti l'chal. What I tell you cannot eat truma is someone who's a non-kohen. But not because he's an oinen because he lost a relative that day. That would not disqualify him from truma. So we see that for truma, an oinen could eat. So he's not included in being invalidated from eating truma. Says Gemara, how do you know? Ema maybe say from b'chol zar is telling you only zar is a problem, but lo yarelis. You're telling me that you're including from ish to include oral that he's disqualified from eating truma. How do you know? Maybe say zar is excluding and saying and the oral is not disqualified. Says Gemara, no, except ish. It says ish, which is being marba, and we're saying it's being marba, oral is being problematic. So says the Gemara Marisa. So what do you see fit? How do you know to say that from the ribui, meaning to say what's disqualified from ish, including oral? To exclude, to say is not a problem from b'chol zar, you're excluding oinen. How do you know? Maybe say the opposite. Says the Gemara, no, mistab, it's logical to say arel is having the ribuye. If we're going to include someone that's disqualified for truma, it's more logical to choose the oral is more disqualified. Why? And we mentioned this mnemonic on the previous daf. She came because you have what's called maisim, krusim, v'davar ha'eved. You have these 4 or 5 elements that are unique to astringency of an oral. What are these things? So mechusim maisim. Maisim is 2 maisim. There's 2 elements of an action. First of all, by an oral, there's an action that's lacking over here to make him gemalit. And umaisim b'gufa, it's also an action in his body. You have to do a circumcision. And ba'anish karas, that's krusim. He gets karas if he doesn't have bris milah. And b'yesh levnei hadiba, that's the word b'daber. It's something that was given before Matan Torah. And ha'eved is a milah zachar v'avad makeves. You can't eat from the Karban Pesach if your males in your household and your slaves are not circumcised. So you see, it's more severe. So therefore, that's why specifically oral we're going to include. Says to the contrary, should have included that of an einin to say an einin is going to be possible because it also has certain stringencies. In contrast to bris milah, you only have once in your life on day 8, but an einin could happen at any time. Someone could lose a relative. It also applies to men and women in contrast to bris milah. And a person cannot make him any more non-einin. He has to wait till the day is over. Whereas by bris milah, you could do it in a second. You could be done with it. So maybe say that halach is going to be actually the psul by the einin, not by the oral. Says the Gemara, no. First of all, answer number 1 is it hanach nefishin? Oral is more chomer in 5 ways. Einin is more chomer in only 3 ways. So since there's more stringencies by the oral, we're going to include the ish to tell you the oral may not eat, and b'chol zar is going to say that no, the einin may eat. Another approach, Rava Amar he gives, he says no, b'lo hanach nefishin. He says even without the fact that oral has more stringencies, you cannot go ahead and say that the oral is going to be permitted to eat truma. Because Amakra, the pasuk says, ish. What's the ribuy? What's the source for including someone who's also going to be invalidated for truma? It's ish. Now, why are you saying a man? It's telling you Ezer davar sheish from the ish, vein the isha. What's something that applies to a man and not a woman? That's saying ish. That's about being uncircumcised. So the ribuy of psul is going to be specifically for oral and not for einin, because einin is not just by ish; it's also by an isha. Okay, that finishes explaining with Rabbi Kiva. Now it says the Gemara, Rabbi Kiva, Hai Toisha B'Sachar. As we explained, there was 2 different sources of Machlekes Rabbi Kiva and Rabbi Eliezer. Where do you know the halacha of an oral being possible of a truma? Rabbi Kiva says you know it from Ish, and Rabbi Eliezer says you know it from Toisha B'Sachar. Gzeira Shavah, it says Toisha B'Sachar by Pesach, it says Toisha B'Sachar by Truma. Just like Pesach, oral cannot eat, so too by that of a truma. Now the problem is, but Rabbi Kiva, now this Toisha B'Sachar, which he doesn't need to darshan like Rabbi Eliezer as a Gzeira Shavah because he knows him ish, so my Abid lay. What does he do with the Toisha B'Sachar? As Rashi explains, you can't say, as the simple translation of the pasuk, that Toisha B'Sachar, which if you recall from the previous daf, Toisha refers to an Ebed Ivri that's staying till Yovel, and Sachar is an Ebed Ivri that's staying for Sheishanim. You can't say that the pasuk by Korban Pesach is saying Toisha B'Sachar cannot eat it, because the Ebed Ivri, of course, has to eat the Korban Pesach. So what does he do with that? Rabbi Eliezer uses it for it's mufna, it's lafnuya, to take Gzeira Shavah to Truma. But Rabbi Kiva doesn't need it because he knows from Ish. What does Rabbi Kiva do with the word Toisha B'Sachar? So on that Amud Rav Shmaya, he says it's lasuye Aravi Moho. It's coming to include an Arab that's circumcised. The Gevayim Moho. The Gevayim are also the name of a nation that they also circumcise themselves. It's telling us that they cannot eat from the Korban Pesach because they're not excluded from being Arelim because they're actually circumcised. So we needed to exclude them from the Toisha B'Sachar. That's what the pasuk of Toisha B'Sachar is coming to say. It's coming to exclude the Arabi, the Arabian circumcised male, that he cannot have from the Korban Pesach. Says the Gemara, "V'hani moilin ninu?" What? Why do you need to have a miyut from Toisha B'Sachar to exclude the Arab who's circumcised? You think they're quote unquote called circumcised, but they're uncircumcised. And we actually will therefore exclude it from the word oral that we already have a pasuk by Korban Pesach. Why do I need a special rebuild of Toisha B'Sachar? Because about Tanam, the Mishnah Masechet in the Dharm that says, if let's say someone says koinim, I'm taking a nether, shani nena la reilim, that I'm going to have, that I'm prohibiting any benefit from someone who's uncircumcised. So Allah is mutar b'arei Yisrael. If there's a Jew that's not circumcised, he is permitted to have benefit from him. And actually, it's actually forbidden to have from a non-Jew who is circumcised. And so to the other way around. Let's say it says, it says, I'm taking a nether, I'm not having any benefit from those who are circumcised. It's actually permitted from a non-Jew to circumcise. And it's forbidden from a Jew who's uncircumcised. Because as Rashi explains, regarding the halacha of neder, a Jew who's uncircumcised is called gemalit. Because you go after the terminology of people, and Yisraelim are not called Arelim, and Avkacham are not called Ma'im, which Taisa discusses, says, what does that have to do with a halacha and a pasuk? That's only Lashon B'nei Adam, that's how people use the words. Why would that be relevant in regarding when the Torah says B'chal Aral? That would then therefore be Aral, whoever's Aral or not. So Taisa says, you're right, it's really from the Seifa, which you see is an indicator where, and generally Lashon B'nei Adam is the same as that of Torah, unless you see otherwise. But being that as it seems like that even in biblical terminology, an Aral is a guy. And the Gemalit is a Yid, no matter if they're actually circumcised or not. So why do you tell me you need Taisha B'Sachar to exclude our Arab that's circumcised? Shaykhis, he's an oral. Even if he's Gemalit, he's an oral. So I don't need a special pasuk to exclude him. I already know it from B'chal Oral Yachal. So the Gemara says, you're right. So it's needed for something else. According to Rabbi Kiva, what Ger B'Taisha is teaching us by the Karm Pesach is Lasuya is coming to include Ger Shemal B'Lei Tal. Two cases. A convert who's circumcised but didn't table in the mikveh, and another case of cut and kashumal, and a child who's born gemalit, he doesn't have any foreskin. Uksaver Kiva held that a child, a baby that's born mahul tzorch lahatav menadam bris. You have to drip from the child a little bit of the blood of the covenant. So although that he's not really an oral, but the pasuk is coming to tell me that Taisha B'Sachar is coming to include two cases that they're not fully considered mahul, even though he is mahul, and the ger, and even if the cotton is already born gemalit, but still, since the ger did not have the tefillah, and since the child did not have a toughest down bris, they can be excluded from eating from the carbon pesach. That's what Taisha B'Sachar is coming to teach. Now, Rabbi Eliezer, who obviously he's not excluding these cases from Taisha B'Sachar because he already uses Taisha B'Sachar extra to teach me Exer Shava that a oral cannot eat truma. So he goes l'tamei. He goes according to his reasoning because the Amar he says in Perek HaChaylitz Ger Shemal B'Lei Tabel. If you have a convert who's circumcised but did not table, Ger Ma'al Yehu. No, that's not excluded from Taisha B'Sachar. He actually holds that such a person is considered bona by Ger. And he also holds regarding the other case of Rabbi Kiva, cotton kishanel mal. If a baby is born circumcised, ain't tzarich lahatim and dam bris. You don't have to drip the blood of the covenant. He's okay as he is. So therefore, l'shitasa, he doesn't need to have ger v'taisha to exclude because he actually does not hold that they're excluded. He holds their regular gemalt and full-fledged Jews. Okay, but now the Gemara goes the other way around. You explained to me Rabbi Kiva, what did he do with Rabbi Eliezer pasuk? Now Rabbi Eliezer, hi ish. When Rabbi Kiva darshans from the word ish, l'rabbis is an oral. He answers the halacha, his source of the oral being possible truma. According to Rabbi Eliezer, my other, what does he do with ish? Says the Gemara the Torah only spoke in the regular terminology of people. People say ish is like a more poetic way. And you're right, not really darshaning anything from there. This concludes the discussion from the previous daf regarding the opening halacha of Mishnah of how do you know the oral is possible in truma, either from ish or from the gzer shav of Taisha B'Sachar. Now the Gemara comes to qualify this isser of oral b'truma, which is the opening halacha of our Mishnah of our parak, to qualify this isser. It says cut oral, a baby, which within the 8 days where he's not having the bris yet, but he's uncircumcised. What's the halacha? Can you smear with him? You want to take some baby oil in your family of kahanim, so they want to make the baby skin soft and tender, and so you take some shemen, but you have in the family truma. What's the halacha? Can you anoint the baby? Can you smear him with some of this oil? Because as Rashi explained, the Gemara tells in Shabbos Yevamos that sicha is like shtia. Smearing is like drinking. We learn that from the pasuk, but tavi kamayim bekibra. It's like water coming inside. It's kashem batzmaisam. It's like oil in the bones. So what's the question? So the Gemara explains, regarding someone that's uncircumcised, not during the time, meaning before the bris milah, is that ma'akva? Does that prevent from eating truma, or lo ma'akva, or does not prevent? Meaning, if someone's already after the 8th day, and he's an oral states, so that's the Torah says an oral, which we had just before. Machlek is where the source is. Oral cannot eat truma. But when he can't even have a bris milah yet, he's 5 days old, and you want to smear the baby with the oil, is that ma'ak that is oral or not? So Amar B'Zeir says, Tashema, I'll bring a raya from a brisa that it's going to be asur. Because the brisa says, ainly I wouldn't know that it's ma'ak by the Korban Pesach, ela milas zecharov, only the circumcision of his boys, the males in his household, where if he has them b'shas asir, at the time of the making of the Korban Pesach. Meaning, Rashi points out something interesting. We know that for someone to bring his Korban Pesach, his boys, his zacharim, and the slaves have to be circumcised. But there's a different wording that it uses by both of them. By the circumcision of his males, it says in Shemais Yud Beis, V'oz yikriv lasoisoi. If you circumcise your males in your household, then you could come there to do it. What's to do it? That's the shechita. That's the slaughtering of the Korban Pesach. So I would only know that your boys have to be gemelit at the time of the shechita. Now, continues the brisa, and I would only know v'avada b'shas achila. I would only know that your slaves have to be circumcised at the time of the eating of the Korban Pesach, because as Rashi points out, by the avadim it says oz yoichel bay. You circumcise your slaves, then you could eat the Korban Pesach. Which it sounds like that even if he didn't have the eved at the time when he's bringing the Korban Pesach in the afternoon of the 14th of Nisan, but sometime later in the day, some guy says, "Look, I got to run to go eat my Korban Pesach. It's about Shkia time. I need to get rid of it. I want to unload this eved." Says, "I'll take it." That's going to be ma'akav him from eating the Korban Pesach if that slave is not gemal. Now, but says the brisa, how do I know that each one has the problem of the other one? Meaning that even let's say by one's boys, if let's say he was fit to be circumcised when you're coming to eat the Korban Pesach, but he wasn't at the time when you made the Korban Pesach, how do we know that it would be ma'akav the person from eating the Korban Pesach, even though the pasuk only mentions asiyah, which is the making the Korban Pesach, which then he didn't have a problem about being an oral. That's what we have az l'gzeira shavah. It says in the pasuk az zikrav la'soisai by the banim, and it says az yechel by the avadim, which one is talking about the asiyah, one is talking about the achila. We're saying gzeira shavah that each one has the problem of the other ones. Both of them have to have mahul by both of them. Both at the time of the asiyah, which is in the afternoon on Erev Pesach, and also of the chila, which is at the night of the Seder night. Okay, that's what the brisa says. But I'm now going to point out to you my point, how this is going to answer the question. Bishlam avodav, I understand that his slaves. Mishkachas, I can understand that you're trying to tell me that the isnu b'shas achila, you could have a case where it would be possible for him to be an oral at the time of the eating Korban Pesach, less than b'shas asiyah, and it won't be a problem at the time of when you're making the Korban Pesach. And that's important that we're learning out from the sons to the avadim that not only is a problem for the asiyah, it's also a problem for the achila. How so? According to Zamninu, beini. If you buy him in the afternoon after you already made the Korban Pesach, it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon there at Pesach, you buy this guy's slave. Oh, he's an oral. You can't eat the Korban Pesach now. That's a chiddush. You wouldn't have known that without the Gzeir Shabbat Azaz, because the pasuk only says Az Yaseh. And by making the Korban Pesach, I didn't have this edit. Fine. Elazachara, but regarding the boys, which you're being marba to tell me that b'shas ta'achila, obviously they were not there at the time of the asiyah. The isnu b'shas achila, but less nu b'shas asiyah. To tell me that they were there at the time of the eating and not there at the time of the making, how can you have a boy that is only going to be a problem b'shas the asiyah, which you're telling me that az yikrav la'asaysay is by the boys it says regarding the shechita, and by the slaves it says regarding the achila. So you're telling me, I'm letting off mavadim that if let's say it's only the b'shas the achila, so that's going to be a problem. How are you going to have it? It's not possible. It's obviously in the morning of the 8th day, you have to do the bris milah in the morning. How are you going to have that you have the problem of the son only at the time of the achila? Says Zera, obviously, labdis yalid ben asil achila, isn't it that obviously the child was born Erev Pesach after already made the Korban Pesach, between the doing of the Korban Pesach and the eating Korban Pesach? No, obviously you confirm from this that a baby that's just 1 day old before the 8th day, is considered an oral, and he's going to make a problem for his father from being in the Karm Pesach. Because or else, what's this that you're including from the Gzeir Shav of learning out Asiya, not only by Asiya, but also Achila from the Eved, that Az Yochel Boy the Eved applies to that of the Banim? What shaykhs? What do we need a rebbe for? I already know that at the time of the morning when you were bringing the Karm Pesach, it was an oral. I'm like, it wasn't oral then, it wasn't born. Because how else do you have this case? So wait a second, but that means he's a 1 day old baby in the oral and he's going to hold back his father. Obviously the Arelis Shaloi Bisman is the problem, and therefore by Truma also you wouldn't be able to smear the baby with the Truma, even though he cannot be a Gemal anyway because he's within the 8 days. So the Gemara rejects this in many different ways. Amar Rabba says, B'tisbra, you think this is logical to say? But Hima Lekol Zacham Rachmana. The Torah says, circumcise every male, and the pasuk continues with Az Yikra B'Lasais, and then you can go ahead and bring your Karm Pesach. Now behind this baby, he's not something that you could circumcise, you have to wait till the 8th day. So you couldn't tell me that would invalidate the father from bringing his Karm Pesach because he was oral, B'Shasta Achil, even though it wasn't at the Shasa Asiya, because even if the baby's born at 3 o'clock, it's only the pasuk says Himel Lekol Zachar, and then you could bring it. But if he's not Himel because he's within the 8 days, he's only 5 days old or 1 day old, how can you tell me that it's going to invalidate the father from bringing the Karm Pesach? So rather says the Gemara, there's no raya. And the Gemara has many different pshatim to explain how we're going to have this case of no problem about Arelis B'Shas Ta'asiyah, but it'll be a problem B'Shas Achila. What are we talking about over here? We're talking about when the baby had a fever, and then he was healed. And the fever went away between the making of the Karm Pesach and the eating of the Karm Pesach. So that's where there was no problem b'shas ta'asiyah, because you couldn't give him the bris milah because he had a fever. But 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the fever was removed. You could do the bris milah. That's now it's gonna be a problem b'shas ta'achila. Says, wait a second. If that's what happened, and they said like kol shiva. If he got healed between the shechting of the Karm Pesach and the eating of the Karm Pesach, why would it hold back the father from eating the Karm Pesach? It's still not time for the baby to have his bris milah. Why not? It's day 8. The Bryce is going to teach us later on. The yom havra'asai ki yom havolda. The day the baby is healed is like the day the baby is born, which means that you have to wait 7 days to do bris milah. Like Shmuel says, if when the fever goes away, you have to wait another 7 days to do the bris milah. That's why once a baby misses the 8th day, we find that sometimes they wait a while, because once the fever is away, he has to wait 7 days. So how can you tell me that the case is because the fever went away, and now you have to go ahead and do the bris milah, you have to wait 7 days? Says Gemara, they have been like kol shiva. We actually told about when you gave him already 7 days, which means to say that he was healed already 8 days, and the 8th day after the fever went away is on their Pesach. So says, so what are you talking about? So then if this is the 8th day when the fever went away, then the bris should have been in the morning. Because you're supposed to do, because what I mean, you're supposed to do it in the morning. We know every bris in the morning is makdima. So it comes out that akapanim in the morning you have to do with the bris, so then there's already ma'aka from the doing, from the asiyah, the Karm Pesach. Why do you need a pasuk to include it as a shas achila? So the Gemara, no, you need to have the 7 days you have to wait after the fever, is as a getintim and beis me'esli eis. You need it to be 7 24-hour periods. So we're talking about where the fever went away after Chatzais, and there's already 8 days from then. So you already brought your Karm Pesach by Chatzais. 3 o'clock in the afternoon, a week ago, is when the fever went away. So you have to wait. The Moel says, okay, we got to wait a week. The week ends on their Pesach at 3 o'clock. So therefore, that's something that's only ma'akiv for the achila, which was not a problem by the asiyah. It says the Gemara, I ludo, which is the name of a chacham. He taught in the Brisa that Yomim for the asay, the day the baby is healed, is Yevamos Daf. Is like the day the baby is born, which and you have to wait 8 days. My love, isn't it teaching us that my Yevamos Daf, just like the day a baby is born, loy be in a meisleis? It's not true. If a baby is born, someone in my community, a half hour before Shabbos, baby was born. The bris is going to be when? On Friday morning. It's not a full 8 days. So, also the day when he's healed, if you tell me it's Yevamos Daf, Just like the day of the birth, you don't have to wait 8 full 24-hour periods. So to here by the day of the healing. Does he like? No. The day of the healing is better, stronger, more severe than the day of the birth. Where the day of the birth, you don't have to have a full week of 24-hour period. Whereas the day that he's healed, you need meis leis. So Rashi says, so then why is Ludah saying that Yom Kippur? All he's coming to teach us is that you have to wait till the 8th day. It's not saying it has to be full. It's just saying that you have to wait a week. That's what it means, but it doesn't mean exactly. It's actually more severe. It has to be 7 24-hour periods. That was approach number 1, explaining that how could it be that you need the baby to be gemalit at the time of the achila when it's not a problem at the asiyah? First answer is that the child had a fever a week before Pesach, and then it's falling out to be in the afternoon, which would only be a problem with the achila, not from the asiyah. That you know from the Gzera Shalom. So therefore, again, there's no raya to Reb Zera. A second approach or a third approach, meaning versus that of Reb Zera. The Papa, he says that the case is talking about if the child had an affliction in his eye, and he was healed between the making of the Korban Pesach, the shchita, and the eating. Because Rashi says we don't give 7 days only for when there is a fever that was removed. But any other ailment, you don't wait any time. So now the baby could have the bris right away. That would be the case where it was between the asiyah and the chila. A third approach, Rabbi Amay says, we're talking about where the parents were locked up in jail at the time of the shchita, the Korban Pesach. So as Rashi explains, the mitzvah mila is on the parents and not on anyone else. Now, they cannot bring their Korban Pesach because they're in jail. So they send an agent to do the shchita for them. And that's okay because they're not doing it. The shliach is doing it. You cannot bring your Korban Pesach when you have to do the meal of Yizchar. Now, they can't because they're in jail. The pasuk is coming to tell us that if they are let out of jail, Erev Pesach, at the time of the Chila, then the Mila of their son will be Ma'akev. That's what the pasuk is teaching us, where the Hamnishta eloped. They were in jail, and the Shechita was done not by them, by someone else for them, so it wasn't them doing it. If they are let out of jail, that's what we're saying the case would be. Another case where it's possible to have that it's a problem for them when they're out of jail, b'shas achila, which one?
Why is it a problem? But it makes a shliach.
For which?
He has shliach.
No, we're saying that if you have the ability to do bris milah, then you cannot go ahead and bring the Korban Pesach. So here, these people they have no ability to do the bris milah; they're in jail. You want to know why can't they make a shliach to do the bris milah? But the b'shas ta'asiyah, they were locked up in jail. So if they would be able to bring the Korban Pesach, then go and do the bris milah. But here they were in jail, and when they're let out in the afternoon, which was not a problem for the asiyah, now it's a problem for the achila. A fourth approach, Rav Kahana, he says, for example, a tumtum is when you cannot tell the gender of the child because there's a piece of skin covering over the genital area, and that tumtum, the skin tore Erev Pesach, Nimtze Zachar, and you found out that it was a boy, Beini. So there was no bris milah obviously until that happened, and this happened in the afternoon on Erev Pesach. So it would be a chiyuv only for the achila, not b'shas ta'asiyah. A fifth approach, Rav Yomi, he says, we're talking about where the baby stuck his head out of the corridor, out of the vagina, and it's already been 7 days. Now, from the moment that the baby sticks his head out, he's already considered as a vlad. As the Gemara tells in Mesechta Nidaf Chotes with Aleph, Yoter Roishoy, the moment the baby's head comes out, how do you feel? It's like he's born. Now, between the shechting of the Korban Pesach and the eating, his body came out. So that's the time of doing the bris milah. So it's already on the 8th day the baby was born, but it only happened between the asiyah and the achila.
A week before?
Yeah, so already a week. The baby had the head out a week, but then the body only came out a week later. So the Gemara says, "Michai, could such a baby survive?" But in the Bryce in Perikama Pelas Mesechtas Nidam, once the baby comes out to the ear space of this world, this is one of the miracles that happens in childbirth. which is according to one pshat is the bracha of Asher Yatzar, that if he would open what's closed or close what's open, refers to this idea of niftach hasasam and nistam hapasuach. At birth, that what was closed gets open, and what was closed gets open, and what was open gets closed. As Rashi explains, the fetus, his mouth is sealed, but his belly is open. That's the umbilical cord. Now, once he comes out to the world, what was closed gets open, which is his mouth, and what was open, which is his belly, gets closed. And Shalom Aleichem, if that wouldn't be the case, in your chalichis afilu sha'achas, that's what the pshat afilu sha'achas, he wouldn't be able to survive even for one moment because he wouldn't be able to nurse. And so too over here, how could the baby have survived all this time with its head out and it's not eating, its mouth is out and its belly is inside at the time of the birth for a week? So where the fever actually fed the child. The sickness feeds the sick person. Says the Gemara, Ishta Deman, whose fever is feeding this baby? Meaning, even just having this fever is something that sustains the child. If it's the fever of the child and the baby, and when the baby comes out, the fever gets removed. If that's the case, then you would have to wait 7 days when it comes out, because you told me the day he gets healed from the fever is like the day he's born. So even though he's already had his head out for a week, you have to wait another week. Says the Gemara, we're talking about where the mother's fever, the mother had a fever. And that fever sustained physiologically the baby. That's one pshat. And therefore again, the body only came out after Chatzais and then Pesach, and therefore that's when you had to do the Milah. Over here, another pshat you could say is, when do we say that the baby cannot survive? It's is where the baby's not screaming. Where the baby's screaming, then it could survive. And again, it's like a heat-like fever. It's something the body goes into some type of a reaction, and that actually could sustain the baby. So even though usually you can't survive a full sha'achas, but if there's this fever, then if the baby is screaming, then the baby could survive, and therefore you could have such a case. Now, a related discussion regarding oral, which is the topic of our parak, to open the halacha of our Mishnah, says oral, a Jew who's uncircumcised, who became tummy from a dead person, he's mekabel hazah. He could be sprayed to be purified from his tumah. In other words, and when he circumcised himself, he doesn't have to go back and do another hazah, and he could eat kachim. And we don't say hazah of oral is not considered as hazah. Which Tosfos wonders, he says, why do you need to say that an oral could get hazah? Well, even according to Rabbi Kiva, it says he's like a tummy person. A tummy person could get hazah, obviously, because he's tummy. So Tosfos wonders, what's the chiddush? What do you need to say this for? But Al-Kabam, this halacha the Gemara is bringing is that oral could be sprayed with the purifying waters of the paraduma to become tar, even though he's an oral, even though he's nishgamalat. What's the riot? We find this by our fathers in the days of Yeshua ben Nun, when they made the Korban Pesach in Gilgal, which is one of the places they were. Shekiblu hazah, that they received the spray from the tumas mace that they had. Kishin arelim, even though they were uncircumcised. Where do we find? It says the pasuk in Sefer Yeshua. It says ba'am olu min hayard. The people. This is when they finally coming into Eretz Yisrael. The people came out of the Jordan. But also l'chaydish adishin in the 10th of the first month, meaning on the 10th of Nisan. Now says the Gemara ba'asara lemihili. On the 10th of Nisan, those Jews who came in from the Midbar, finally after 40 years, they were all uncircumcised. And why were they nishgamalim? Because of the weakness of traveling. What Shaisa discusses, is that true? Were they nishgamalim? Whatever about upon them, there were those that were not gemalim, because of the weakness of the travel. And to travel and be circumcised would be something that it could be dangerous. So the question is, hazah imas abidlo. So this tumas mess that they had, when did they spray them with the sprays? Meaning, as Rashi explains, most of the tzibur were tmei mace, because they became tummy from their fathers, because all those who came out of Egypt died in the desert, and these were their sons. Like the pasuk says in Yeshua Parakeh, V'smenein hekem tachtam oisam ol Yeshua. So, how did they become purified to eat the Korban Pesach? Because they all had to bury their fathers over the 40 years they were in the Midbar. And they were arelim. So, isn't it lav kshin arelim? why do you say that they were sprayed when they were uncircumcised? So Rashi explains that it must have been they were sprayed on day 3 and day 7 when they were arelim, or that each and every one of them, that they were sprayed day 3 and day 7 when they were in the midbar, or now they were being sprayed altogether on the 10th of the month. And on Erev Pesach, even if, let's say now when they finally came out of the Yarden, if it's the 10th of Nisan, it could be day 3 from when you were tummy, which could have been 7 years ago, but it's day 3, and then 4 days later, which is on Erev Pesach, you have 4 days, which you always have to have 4 days between the sprays. Usually it's what's called day 3, day 7. You have to have 4 days between the first and the second spray. Because if they didn't spray them until the 11th, which was after they finally got the Milah, they would come out that the second spray would not be before Pesach when you have to be taught. So you see that obviously they were being sprayed at least one spray when they were still Arelim, because they didn't get circumcised until after the 10th of Nisan, and by then they had to already have been sprayed at least one spray. So you see that an oral could be Makabal Hazal. Says, how do you know? But they Pesach well. Maybe that year they didn't bring a Korban Pesach at all. So maybe they got purified, but there was no Pesach at that year by the 14th of Nisan. Says, you cannot entertain to say that. Because the Pasuk says, Vayasu is a Pesach, they made a Korban Pesach. Okay, but Masim Marzuchi says, but V'diva Pesach Baba Tumhaya. We know that if God's Klal Yisrael is Tameh, Tumah is Hutch B'tziba, so maybe they brought the Korban Pesach in a state of Tumah. Who said that they got sprayed as Arelim? So Amalei Rav Ashi says, no, Tanya Hadi will learn explicitly in the Brisa, Molu B'tablu, they circumcise and they table, but also Pischein B'tahara, they brought the Korban Pesach in Tahar. Obviously, that you can become Tahar from your Tumas mess, even as an oral, as they did when the Jews came out of the Midbar, finally coming to Eretz Yisrael. Now, another related discussion regarding oral, Amar Rabbi by Yitzchok Amar Rabbi, he says, Nitna Priyas Mila. The halacha of what's called Priya, of pulling back, uncovering the Mila, which is that underneath the foreskin there's this membrane beneath it that you have to pull back, that was not given to Avram Avinu. It was not given to Avram Avinu, which Taisa brings that still Avram Avinu, and it was mechanical terakula, even though it was not given, but this mitzvah was not given to Avram Avinu. Shlomo says in the pasuk over there, it says, Be'esahi Oma Hashem al Yeshua. At that time, Hashem said to Yeshua, "Asay l'cha, make for yourself charvos sudim, make for yourself sharp knives, begoimer, etc." Which the pasuk says, and then go ahead and beshuv, go back and circumcise the Jewish people a second time, begoimer, etc. So what's this? Go and circumcise them a second time. It means besides the milah that there's also a priya, and you see that was specifically in the days of Yeshua ben Nun. Says no, maybe that's saying to do them a second time was those who were not yet circumcised. The Sivkat says over there later on, says because they were all circumcised, those who came out, and all those who were born in the Midbar, on the way in the coming out of Mitzrayim, they did not circumcise. Maybe it's for those who aren't circumcised. How do you know it means to do a second phase of the Bris Milah, which is that of the Priya? Says Gemara in Cain, if that's the case, my shuv. What's the word shuv? Which sounds like another time. What's another time? Another time sounds like you already had a milah. Now we're doing you a second milah. I love the priya. Obviously, it's referring to the priya, to the pulling back of the membrane. So the Gemara says, okay, my shayness. Then what's, if you're already darshing the word shuv, the pasuk says that b'shuv mol as b'nei yisrael shayness, then go ahead and be mal them a second time. So shuv means to do the priya. But what's shayness? So it says the Gemara, Sheinis is like kushay seif milah l'tchilas milah. It's coming to compare the end of the circumcision, meaning when you're finishing, to when you start. Meaning, matchilas milah ma'akebes, just like the beginning of the circumcision of the foreskin is ma'akev, is integral. Av seif milah, so to the end of the milah, which Rashi translates means to say what's called the tzitzin, the strips that are left over. If all of the foreskin was not cut off, that's the end. That's also what it's saying, Sheinis, a second time, meaning that you have to go back a second time, because ma'akim by those strips at the end are also ma'akim. It's not like the Mishnah Masechet Shabbos. Elohein tzitzin ha'ma'akim nesamila. These are the strips of the flesh of the foreskin that are ma'akim the milah. Arbasa achayf esrei atar is the skin that covers the majority of the atara, whatever that means exactly, the corona, or is it the gland itself? But ve'ein ach b'truma. So that's ma'akim the milah, and also such a person cannot eat truma if he's a kai. As is always mentioned, it doesn't mean necessarily the majority of the circumference, even if it's not even the majority of the circumference, even if it's just the majority of the height of the atara, if you have a strip that's majority of the height, it's also going to be akib on the milah. Now the Gemara says, we quoted before the pasuk in Yeshua that the Yidden were not gemalit in the midbar. And they had to circumcise themselves, and they're still a reilim. And we said even so, they were able to be makabel. So that's why this discussion goes right back to the previous discussion, where uba midbar my tamalei. Why in the midbar were the Jews not circumcised? So you might say, if you want, you can say mishum choshed archa, because it's very hard. They were always traveling, and to travel as a bris milah. Moshe Rabbeinu didn't want them out because they were traveling back to Mitzrayim. It's very hard. It would be too extenuating on them. Or as we've seen because the northern wind, which is a very calm wind, did not blow in the midbar, and therefore they didn't do the bris milah time like we learned in the Brisa. All the 40 years the Jews were in the midbar, the northern wind didn't blow during the daytime, and therefore the sun didn't shine. Where it covers the clouds cover the sun, but the northern wind goes and scatters the clouds. There was no northern wind, which Taisa says that meaning it didn't blow on its own. Can't say it didn't blow at all, but it didn't blow on its own, and therefore they couldn't do the bris milah. So in my time, why was there no northern wind? If one, you could say mishum the nezuvim hava because they were scorned, meaning Rashi says from the mice of the eagle. They weren't fit for pure light. Taisa says no, they were actually forgiven for the Maisa Egel. It's actually because the Maisa Miragel. But either there was some sin that the Jewish people did, or everybody said, if you want, you could say, the reason why the northern wind didn't blow was because we didn't want to lay Nivdar and Ani covered. We said that it'll blow away the clouds so that the sun could shine, but there was also clouds of glory which surrounded the Jewish people. And so therefore it didn't blow, so not to blow away that Ani covered, but at the same time, the sun couldn't come in. And therefore, again, that's the reason why they couldn't do bris milah, because you need the sun to go ahead and help healing. And they didn't because it wasn't going to blow away the Nali cover. And Rambam Papa says, he'll live for Yevamos Daf, a very thick, cloudy day, and Yevamos Shusa, a day when the southern wind blows, which is a very harsh wind. So then, we don't do a bris milah on that day, and we also don't do any bloodletting on that day. Because again, you need certain good weather conditions for the person who does such a procedure. However, but today's time, where people already trample on this, and people do it anyway, that's what the pasuk says, until Hashem will heal the fools. One last conclusion of this discussion, Tanabon in the Brisa. All those 40 years that the Jews were in the desert, there was no day, you're right, although he said that there was no ruach tzafinus, but that was during the daytime. In spite of that, there was no time that the northern wind didn't blow, at least b'chatzi halayla, by midnight. Shlomo says the pasuk in Shemais. B'chatzi halayla was in the midnight. Hashem hikukol b'chulu b'gomer, and Hashem did makas b'chayr. Which must be my Talmud. Where do you see from there that there was a ruach tzafinus at midnight that Hashem did makas b'chayr? Hakamash Malach, we're teaching you the eis rotzain, an opportune time. Milsi is something, meaning like Rashi explains. Since chatzos layla we know is an eis rotzain for makas b'chayros, so too is the eis ratzon for ruach tzafinus. And if there was no day that the northern wind did not blow at least by midnight, and that was actually a simon that we know from the Gemara Brachas for David, that he had a harp hanging above his bed, and they put it towards the north. And once the midnight would come, so the northern wind would blow and it would play by itself, and he would wake up. And Rashi was saying this out over here, that in all the 40 years it didn't stop. It was coming to tell you that even though in those 40 years it was scorn and it didn't blow during the daytime, it still blew at Chatzos Laila because that's Eis Ratzon, and therefore at least by Chatzos Laila, and that's what we know, it's an Eis Ratzon, that even though they didn't have the Ruach Tzafinus, they still had it at least by Chatzos Laila. Anytime.